Good luck.
I was out for burgers yesterday. My friend and I were standing in the parking lot. He was having a smoke. And we saw this car very slowly back out of the parking lot. And slowly back into another car. Back in forward drive. And then in reverse. And it was this close. Like I was just able to sprint towards it and hold my hand. Like he almost lost his mirror. And later, yesterday evening, I thought to myself, how strange is it that here this evening I see this car crash very slowly. Well, tomorrow I'm going to be talking about car crashes very slowly. I want to talk to you today about stories and conversation. Stories and conversation. What's a story? If you look in a dictionary, you'll see something like this, an account of an event or incident. Or perhaps a narrative, either true or fictitious, a tale written in a more or less imaginative style, specifically a fictitious tale. Or perhaps even a falsehood, a lie. I'm full of stories. I like to tell stories during my talks. I bet most of you also have stories in your mind that you tell at parties or stuff like that. Some of these stories may be true, some of these stories may be mostly true. But how many things do we tell ourselves or each other that are not necessarily true? So today, I want to give you this tool, this idea that these stories that we have, they're not wrong per se to have these stories, but at least share them with other people. Dismantle these stories by having conversations. That's what we want to talk about today. Dismantle stories through having these conversations. I've been a software developer since I was 17. So that's almost 16 years now. And about 8 years ago, I got to do my first big project. Can you remember when you got to work on your first big project? Now, big is relative, of course. For me, it was a big project. Looking back, it still kind of was a big project. Our customer had a list of 250 features. We had to discuss each and every feature. Estimate every feature, of course. Some of them were already possible with our product. Some of them maybe needed a little configuration. Some of them needed actual development work. Actual work, that's a story. And I can remember very vividly, we estimated this project was going to take us 13 weeks. It ended up being 16 weeks. That's not so bad. Yeah. And out of those 13 weeks that we spent 16 weeks on, there was one feature in particular I will never ever forget. Waterschappen. Has anyone ever heard of waterschappen? You have, because you're also a Dutchie. Waterschappen. There's something very special about the Netherlands. Have you ever been to the Netherlands? We have a lot of water. Now, there are more countries that have a lot of water, but we tend to have a lot of water in places where we don't want to have a lot of water. So a long time ago, we cleared out most of the water, and then we institutionalized keeping the water out of there. So the Netherlands doesn't only have like towns and municipalities and provinces, but we have an entirely separate structure called waterschappen. Die waterschappen, they are intended to keep the land that we reclaimed as land. The actual English translation of waterschap is waterboard. I don't think we're ready to reclaim that word yet. So watership might be the best way to say it. Now, our customer asked us, one of these 250 features, we spent 2 weeks of our 13 weeks of the 16-week project on this one feature, can we filter, sort, select our contacts based on in which waterschap they live? Well, sure. Has anyone ever used a Google geolocation service? Yeah. It will tell you everything about an address. Well, that's a story. It won't tell you the waterschap of an address. So how do you figure this out? Well, it does tell you the latitude, longitude coordinates of an address, and we found a supplier that could give us the latitude, longitude coordinates of all the edges, of all the polygons of every waterschap. So all we had to figure out of these 21 waterschappen with about 250 polygons, which of these polygons is your address in? How would you solve that? It's actually very simple. You go to Stack Overflow, you copy and paste the code from the first answer, and you'll find something like this. This is a really cool trick. So what you do is you draw this polygon, you draw a bounding box around it, and from the edge of the bounding box to the point, you draw a line, and you count the number of intersections between the polygon and that line. In, out, in, out, in, out, in. That's really cool, isn't it? So we spent 2 weeks on this feature, and when we demoed it, people were impressed. This was my first big project, and people were impressed. Oh, I started to feel good about myself. I started to form this story that I'm actually a really good developer. This feature went live with the rest of the project, and half a year later, our product owner was back in our office. She was there for unrelated reasons. She had a meeting with some other co-workers of mine. But before that meeting started, she was drinking coffee in the hallway. And I thought, this is my chance. I walked up to her and I said, "Hou de waterschappen." And she's like, "Yeah, hi Pim, I'm good, how are you?" Yeah, fine. Hou de waterschappen. And she told me something I will never forget. She told me something that was so profound, like mind-blowing to me. It changed my career. I asked her, "How are de waterschappen?" And she said, "Waterschappen? What? Do we have that?" Am I a bad developer? What would you do in my position? Would you change something, or would you just say, "Well, I mean, they picked that feature. They asked for it, we just built it, but they asked for it, they paid for it"? Or is there maybe something I can do? Is there maybe something that I can learn from this particular interaction, from this project, from this lack of conversation, so that in the future this doesn't happen to me again? And we decided as a team, yes, there is something that we can do. We want to be responsible, not just for our technology, we want to be responsible for the impact that our technology is making. We tell our customers, we want to help you profit from the sprints that you do with us so that you can purchase more sprints. So we decided to make a change. We decided that we were not going to let this just happen again anymore. So we unearthed an old, forgotten technique, a tool or trick, something arcane, an art long forgotten, so that we could help our customers discover what was really going on and what was really needed. Now, let's say you get a feature request like this. Export donations. So give you a little bit of context. A lot of my clients are fundraising organizations, charities. So they collect donations from people who support their case, and then they want to export those donations, apparently. So if you were in the workshop with Marcello, I cheated. This is actually my work. Export donations. Is there something we can do to make this feature happen? Or should we perhaps ask some smart questions? What would you ask your client if they ask you, hey, can we export donations? What do? Maybe you've heard of this, ask 5 times, why? Have you heard of that? I say, no, that's too quick. The first thing you ask is not why, but who's asking? Who is asking this? Because it turns out if we had asked, okay, who's asking for the waterschappen, then they would actually have to scratch their heads, read up on their notes, and they would have figured out that there was one guy once in a local meeting somewhere far away from the head office that said it would kind of be nice if. Random fun fact, I actually got to talk to that product owner last week, Friday. They are still not using it. So export donations, the first thing we ask is why? Who? Who is asking us this? And it turns out I've had this very conversation with more than a dozen clients, so this is actually true. This is actually my experience. I've had this conversation, and every single time I get just about the same answer. And it would be something like Mark, the marketing manager. Now, of course, not every organization has literally a guy named Mark being the marketing manager. No, this is a persona, a real, but not actual person that has certain characteristics that we can empathize with. So that we can really try to feel, okay, what's life like for Mark? And how can we make Mark's life easier? How can we make him happier? How can we help him? And it turns out, if we ask Mark, okay, so why, Mark, do you want to export these donations? Then Mark will tell us something, well, I want to export these donations, so for example, I can filter donors that donated a lot. Everyone's, of course, familiar with this format, the arcane technique of user stories. I think user stories are a very misunderstood technique, and I hope to show you why. Maybe that's just a story I have in my head. As Mark, the marketing manager, I want to export donations so that I can filter donors that donated a lot. Okay, Mark. Why? Well, I want to send them a mailing. Okay, cool, you want to send them a mailing. Why? Well, I want to send them a mailing so we can tell them how we use their donations to improve the world. Cool. Why? Well, they want to know they made a difference. Okay, they want to know they made a difference. Why? So they will donate more. Has anyone ever done a digital donation? This is my field of expertise, so I've implemented something like this a dozen times, and it turns out that yes, every time you do a donation and they have some information of you, especially if they have an email address, you can soon expect an email that says, "Thank you, sir, may I have some more?" And why is that? Well, because it works. But when we write user stories and we do the why, then almost inevitably we will come to a point that says money. Now, this user story in itself is not useful anymore. But the step before is. Because there's something special about this version of this user story. As Mark, the marketing manager, I want to tell donors that donated a lot how we use their gifts to improve the world so they know they made a difference. Does anyone know the Agile Manifesto? What's the first line of the Agile Manifesto? People and interactions over processes and tools. There's no software in this version of this user story anymore. We're just talking about people and interaction. Now, there is still something a little bit off about this user story. There's some legacy in this user story, if you will, because Mark, the marketing manager, has been the person who was historically burdened, but who is not actually benefiting. He's benefiting in the sense that he gets to keep his job, but he's not actually benefiting. The people who donated a lot are benefiting. So let's introduce a persona for those people, something like Donna the Big Donor. Donna the Big Donor wants to know how her gift helped improve the world so she knows she made a difference. Now, once you get to this point, when you have a user story that is not talking about money yet, it's not talking about software anymore, and it's burdening someone who's also benefiting, I think you got a pretty good user story. And when you have something like this, you can put it on your backlog and you can do some work. And that's what we did at this point in time. This is a couple of years ago. We practiced with this user story format, and we were quite happy with it. We were empathizing with our customers. We were having a good time. But then our sprints would look like this. From doing to testing, doing, testing, accepted, and then done. So we would usually find like a bug in testing once or twice, and then get it accepted. We were happy. We had helped a bunch of these fundraising organizations, made a lot of our clients quite happy. And then we got our feet wet. In Dutch we have this saying, it's called nat gaan. It means literally to go wet. And it kind of means, loosely translated, the degree to which you were expecting success and then you fail is the degree to which you went wet. Now, we were on a high, and we went wet hard. We had a very interesting customer, slightly different, not a fundraising organization, but a product organization. They were selling a product, so they needed their stuff to be good. Now, we were going into each sprint with a list of intentions, and we'll figure it out. It'll work, it'll be fine. And what started happening with that particular customer was this. Ping, pong, ping, pong, ping, pong, ping, pong. We were using Trello at the time. We were working in one sprint, I think, on story 260 and alike, and on story 20. I started not to feel so good about myself as a professional developer. Of course, that's a story too. So, what was happening? We were going into each sprint with a list of really cool intentions. And during the sprint, we would always figure something out to get it to work. But this customer was really, really critical. My boss liked to say this customer was worried about the color of the coffee cups before the foundation of the building was laid. We gave this customer all the reason in the world to toy around with us, because while you can still say from a very explicit task, there is still a bug in here, it's very hard to say, I don't accept this task, even though everything about this task is okay. But when we gave our customer user stories, they could say, well, this doesn't really solve the problem now that I see it. And we had no leg to stand on. What we were doing, customers come to us and they say, hey, can you use software? And then we say, okay, but what solution are you asking us to implement? And what is the problem that is actually at the root of this solution that you're asking us to work on? This is what we were doing with this user story format stuff. We were really trying to get to the bottom of what is the actual problem. And once you have this, you can do something really cool. You can say, okay, now that we understand your problem, I can think of several solutions, and we maybe have various ways of implementing these solutions. So I can offer you choice. I can offer you what you are asking us. But I can also offer you maybe something more automated. Or, if I really employ my creative thinking, like Marlon was talking about yesterday morning, maybe we can come up with something entirely different. So imagine this Donna, and she wants to know, how has my donation impacted this world? Well, what we could do is just send her over there. Now, this might not be the option your customer will regularly pick, But we found out about 10 to 20% of our features that we worked on ended up being significantly different from what our customers were expecting. And those features really changed the way our projects were going. But there's something still not right about this. We thought we were doing Agile at this point. Maybe we were. When I was studying computer science, we were having a course on project management. And our lecturer told us that a software project is like this kite. You have time versus money and quality versus quantity. You know that model? Who's heard of that model? Yeah, a couple of people. So the thing is, he told us about waterfall, time, money, and quantity are fixed. So we toy around with quality. But in agile projects, time, money, and quality are fixed. And we toy around with quantity. Can I let you in on a little secret here? This idea is a lie. It's a lie. There is nothing true about this. Have these people ever done a software project? Has any one of you ever asked the customer, okay, well, we're going to go 30% over budget, but we'll just drop 30% of features and it'll be fine? How do they come up with these models? We'll talk more about this one later. So we started doing these different solutions. Give us your problem, and we'll come up with 3 solutions, maybe more, maybe less. And we started to use a technique called story mapping or user story mapping. Has anyone heard of user story mapping? Cool, you all have something to Google tonight. So user story mapping is mapping out the process that these users are following, preferably even adding the deep dive user story questioning mechanism that we talked about. So you create basically a 2D backlog. Basically, that's just a story. And by estimating the tasks that you put on your backlog, well, you can basically, like you did before, basically, fill your sprints up with as much velocity as you can, capacity as you can manage. But don't forget to still have that connection to why we were doing these things. So we started doing this technique, this user story mapping, which made very visually available to our customers what they were picking. And at this point in time, this is, I think, 2.5 or 3 years ago, we were spending some, I don't know exactly how much time we spent on this every week, but we spent enough time on this to plan more than one sprint ahead. So we could give our customers some leeway in what they were choosing to go into the sprint, and if we were performing very well, we could still get some additional work in there. And the first time we started using this, in retrospect, it was a really, really good client, the best I ever had. But the first time we started this, we could tell our customer very quickly, we're just barely not going to make it, and they actually toyed around with dropping some features. I was mind blown. But we had a really good project the first time we used this. And again, this lasted for a while. We were on a high. We thought we were doing so well. I was getting that story again that I'm such a good developer. Our sprint backlogs would look something like this. Very similar to what we had before, but with the connection to the process step that it was a part of. And our sprints, again, just look like this. And then, not even too long ago, we got a new challenge. 2 of my most difficult clients so far, at the same time. We were doing sprints for both of these clients, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. Because we had been living with this story idea that if we give customers a little bit more time after each sprint, they have more time to process the sprint review, have more time to perhaps learn, make new choices, and that would improve the sprint planning we would do for the next time. It turns out it's actually really hard to do a major context switch every sprint. So this was absolutely exhausting. Both projects lasted about 15 weeks, so we spent 30 weeks almost non-stop sprinting with the constant context switching, and after those 30 weeks, we all went on a long vacation. Now, we came into this project very, very confidently, on a very big high. Every single sprint of these approximately 30 sprints that we did was a major success. And both projects miserably failed. We were doing this. I told you before, we were looking at these problems that our customers were supplying us with. And we were giving them options. What do you want us to work on? And we were only planning a sprint and a half ahead. And our customers, of course, they will pay attention that the project will work out fine, right? It's their project, it's their money. We're just giving them options. And it turns out both of these customers were picking the expensive features all the time. And so there were a lot of features left at the end of our projects, both of them. Now, if it happens once, you can again say, it's just a customer. But if it happens every time, then maybe you need to look in the mirror and say, maybe it's me, maybe I'm setting myself up for this. So we decided we needed to make another change. We needed to make sure that this would not happen again. So very explicitly, we decided that from now on, when we're going to do the user stories thing, and then we were going to look at solutions, we would pick a large, medium, and small solution. And we would offer our customers explicitly the choice between these three. But also, we would be spending some more time upfront on that project discovery. And the next time we had a 10-sprint project, the first 5 sprints, we more than doubled the investment we made into discovering the possible work. Now, that might not seem very agile to you. If we have customers that have been with us for longer, we'll lower this time by some degree because there is some trust. There is some mutual expectation. But for new customers, we want to make sure that before the project is halfway, everybody knows what they can expect. And they can make more meaningful choices that should end up to a bigger project success. So at about halfway through the project, we will dial down the amount of time we spend. And then by the end, we should be about in known territory and should not have to refine much more than that. And this is more or less where we are today. This is more or less still working for us very well. In fact, I can tell you honestly that I am again on a high. I again think, I'm a really good developer. I am aware that it's a story. But we're doing well, and we're achieving our goals. We're making customers happy. We can still probably improve on getting the actual feedback, like 6 months, maybe a year after the project. Are the crazy suggestions that we gave, are those working out for you? But on the whole, this approach is working for us really well. We are dismantling these stories by having more conversations. More conversations. More conversations. Every time in my career that I encountered, why is, every time I'm not doing enough conversation. I'm not talking to people. So every time, the answer is simple. Just talk to people. Just have these conversations. Now, the thing about Agile that I talked to you about earlier, it's not so much that we drop features from these Agile projects. We make our projects fit the budget by offering our customers projections of their choices. We pick the solutions that fit the budget and make the sprints work. And that is an ongoing conversation. And that ongoing conversation so far is making our customers very happy. So what I want for you, well, maybe not today, but maybe Monday, have these conversations with your team, manager, boss, company, and if at all possible, with your stakeholders, with your customers. I want you to write wonderful software that solves people's problems by dismantling these stories through conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pim, for this excellent talk. We have some time for questions, so if anyone wishes to ask Pim something.
Well, I think it was basically clear.
Sorry? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Although it was totally clear, I just want to make something like more clear. Is it maybe the central problem you had, and actually the customers had, with having trouble to truly see and grasp the real business value of a feature? They think that something will give them X amount of money, and X, in reality it gave X, the tenth of X, right? That's one question. And another question is, do you know about impact mapping from Gojko Ajic, and how this relates to this whole story? Thanks.
No, thank you. So the first question was, perhaps you have trouble estimating the business value and impact of the features that you're working on. And the second question was impact mapping. Yeah, we've actually done impact mapping for a while. We made some choices on how much effort we spent on discovering work. And we found that the tools that I've talked about now are sufficient for where we are, but impact mapping is most certainly on our radar. There's a couple of these tools floating around, and the industry is testing out all of them and is figuring out which of these tools will actually support all the work the best. I also think most of our customers aren't that complex, aren't doing that crazy things, so we don't perhaps need to spend so much time. But yeah, impact mapping is certainly a very cool tool. We've toyed around with it at the start of projects to get like a basic idea of what are the impacts that you're looking for, but that was more on a large project scale than on a feature per feature scale. So impact mapping, it's a very good suggestion. I can definitely recommend everyone, if you have the time, check out impact mapping. It's a really cool technique. And as far as the business value, yeah, of course, I have no way of knowing the business value, and sometimes I have my suspicions. And that's sometimes very hard, because I have this story in my mind that the idea that they're working with is maybe not so good, and they have the idea that it is very good. And it's, in the end, not up to me to decide that we're not going to do this. And that's sometimes very hard. Especially if it's in-house. If your salespeople have these ideas that, oh, everything will be fabulous, and you're like, no, you haven't thought of this and this and this and this, it'll be fine. Those are very hard situations. But if you want to know how I really think about those, you should check out my talk from last year here at WebCamp Zagreb.
Okay, thank you. We have another question here.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. It was very nice. I have a question that regarding your point that we need more conversations to better realize things, which I agree. But I often encounter developers preferring less meetings and just more work. How do you confront that?
So the crazy thing about this one, and I'm going to be a little bit mean here, is that the developers that don't want to talk are often the ones that have the biggest mouth. I really don't mind so much to have a developer in my team that says, just give me work to do. I don't mind, but then shut up when I give you work to do. I'm a little bit angry because I've had experiences in this regard. I'm actually a little bit angry. It's okay if you don't want to do this. That's fine. You are a valuable developer and you can't focus on every skill. But you have to understand that if you don't have a skill, you don't get into the boxing ring. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Hey, great talk.
Where are you? Oh, there.
I'm here. Yeah. Okay. So a question I have is that, in my experience, I have very difficult time getting to the part of initiating these conversations as a developer. So I feel that there is often a huge amount of indirection between the developer and the feature that is being requested. You have your team leader, you have your boss, you have the project managers, you have the stakeholders, you have market manager, you have market manager's manager.
Yeah.
Do you have any books to recommend or anything that would, or advice that would help initiate these conversations and maybe lower the amount of indirection to actually get into the position to ask these why questions?
That's a really good question. I don't have an actual answer on this other than just random thoughts. There are a lot of developers, especially the larger your organization or your customer's organization is, the harder it can be to talk to actual stakeholders. So I don't know what to deal with this. Maybe someone else has some ideas that they like to share, but I would suggest have at least a conversation with who you can talk to and try and really make the case. If you let me talk to the stakeholders, then I can write more valuable software. Maybe someone else has some suggestions?
Any more questions?
Yeah.
Yes? No? Okay then. Thank you very much, Pim.